Hello, Legacy Sabers, Marsh here. So today we're going to talk about two-dimensional arrays. You're going to want to make sure you open up your notes so that you can follow along. Our essential question today is ultimately, how do you create an array of arrays? So maybe you need to store data in what would be considered like an Excel table. Maybe you have multiple columns and multiple rows is what we're looking at here. So two-dimensional arrays, ultimately, we are having arrays that are considered up to now a one-dimensional or just a single line of elements. Often data comes naturally in the form of a table, spreadsheet, Excel sheet, Google Sheets, right? Which need a two-dimensional array. Definition, two-dimensional array. A two-dimensional array allows to create an array with rows and columns, or basically like a grid-like format. Here are some examples that you might see. Maybe it's movie ratings by multiple reviewers. So each row is a different reviewer and each column is a different movie. Or maybe we're looking at a grade book in that you have each row is a new student and each column is a very specific test. So then what you would get if you look on a row is you would look at what a student did for each individual test one at a time. Two-dimensional arrays are indexed by two subscripts, one for the row and one for the column. So here's my example of my movie list right down here. Get myself my pen going. There we go. Here's my example of my movie. So I have movies and then I have my reviewer. The rows are over here. So these are my rows. These are my columns. Okay. So if I say rating 0, 2, that's row 0, column 2. So that would be row 0, column 2. I would get a 2. 1, 3. So that's row 3. For my column, I would get 8. Okay. So when we're looking at it, it is row, column. Some students get really confused and they do column row just because of just how it is. I like to remember that it's not alphabetical. It's row, column. Those of you that took upper level math and you've looked at matrices, similar ideas, row, column. Similarity with our one-dimensional arrays. Each element in your 2D array must be of the same type, so you can print primitive types, aka double, int, stuff of that nature, or you can put objects. So maybe you want to put student objects or cat objects or cars. Any kind of things that you want to put in there. Subscripted variables can be used just like a variable. So I could say rating bracket 0 bracket 3 equals 10. What that would do is it would make row 0, column 3, his number would be 10. And you can put numbers or letters, variables for your column and row information, just like we were able to do bracket index when we were doing one-dimensional arrays. When to declare a two-dimensional array. Declaring of a two-dimensional array looks like the following. You're going to say what type of information are you putting in the two-dimensional array. You're going to put double brackets. That's how you're showing that it's a two-dimensional array. You're going to put the name that you want to call the two-dimensional array equals new, insert the type again, and then bracket how many rows do you want, bracket how many columns do you want. So my example here, I am making a two-dimensional array that's going to have int values in it, so numbers without decimals. I'm going to name it rating, and it's going to be it's going to have 3 rows, 4 columns. So what that would look like is I would have 1, 2, 3 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. My rows would have the numbers of 0, 1, and 2 because we start counting at 0. And same with my columns, 0, 1, 2, 3 is what we would have for a total of 12 spots inside of that two-dimensional array for me to store. When working with a two-dimensional array, to find the number of rows, you're going to say rating.length. And then to find the number of columns, you can say rating bracket 0.length. And you're like, why, Marsh? Well, here's the reason. When you're doing a two-dimensional array, ultimately what it is you're making an array of arrays. So here is my one-dimensional array. I'm going to draw it up and down because it's easier for us to see. Okay. And then inside of those two-dimensional arrays, I got to change my color here so you guys could see it easier. I'm going to put an array inside of there. Like this. Okay, so what I have just made is a two-dimensional array. So when I am looking at this, sorry guys, I've lost my pen. There we go. When I'm looking at this, if I ask how many rows, aka the original array, I would say the array dot length, because that's the original, the guy outside. If I want to know how many columns I am making, aka how many things are inside of these arrays, I would say rating bracket 0 dot length. This bracket 0 is referring to a particular row, and our row that we're referring to is the 0th row, aka the first row, because our arrays are going to be rectangular, or there could be a square. We will not have what's called a jagged array, aka each row having a different length in size, aka each row having different columns, different amount of columns. That does exist in Java. You can, in fact, do it, but we're not going to worry about that. We're going to believe that every row will have the same number of columns in it. So what we're going to always want to remember is that if I want the number of rows, it's going to be rating dot length, and if I want to find the number of columns, it's going to be rating bracket 0 dot length. All right, how to assign some spots inside the array? Well, I can say rating bracket 1, bracket 2, so that would be at spot row 1, column 2. I'm going to put a 5. You could do that a bunch of times, right? Just go through all the numbers. If you want to make a two-dimensional array and you already know all the values, what you can do is do a curly brace, and then for each new row, put a curly brace, row information, comma, new row. So this would be a new row. This would be the row 1, technically, and this would be row 2 for the next one. Or iteration. The most common form of going through a two-dimensional array is using our loops ability, our iteration ability. So accessing information from a two-dimensional array using row major order, and I'll explain what that means here in a minute. So I'm saying I have that two-dimensional array called rating. It has three rows, 4 columns. And to go through that array, here is my information. It is 2 for loops that are connected. My first for loop is covering the rows. That's why I'm saying my index is going to be R. R is less than rating dot length. Remember, this code we already talked about is how many number of rows we have. And we're going to add R each time. Then my next part is going through the number of columns we have. And I'm going to go as long as I'm going through. C is less than rating bracket 0 dot length. And remember, we said this is keyword for number of columns. And we're going to add to our C each time. Here's what this is going to look like. So I'm going to draw myself a little grid. Boop, boop, boop. And it has 3 rows. 1, 2, 3. And 4 columns. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so I'm going to start in spot 0, 0. That's where I'm going to go first. And notice you're going through the rows slower than you're going through the columns. You're going to go through the columns quicker than you're going to go through the rows. So I'll start in row 0. I start in column 0. My columns have to go all the way through before I change my row. So I'm going to go from 0, 0 to 0, 1 to 0, 2 to 0, 3. Now that I've finished a column, my for loop, my double for loop right here, he's done. I'm going to go back up here, change my row value. Columns are going to reset back to 0, and then I'm going to go like this. Okay, I'm going to reset, go to the next row, finish. That's why it's called row major order, because you are covering the rows last. There is column major order as well. If I did column major order, what that would look like the following. Do some quick erasing here. There we go. If I did column major order, what you would be doing ultimately is you'd flip-flop your two for loop conditions around, and you'd be doing this. So you'd start at 0, 0, go to 1, 0, and then go to 2, 0, and then go back. Okay. It doesn't matter which way you go through. Sometimes they ask you to do a particular order. It ultimately depends on what you like to do. I find row major order just works better in my brain. I think it's because I naturally read left to right and up and down. That's just kind of how we naturally read, right? However, sometimes you do want to be able to do column major order because that's what they tell you to read in your data in, or maybe you have to read from the array in that manner. But column major order does exist. There are other random versions too. There's a snaking one where you can snake from like this. That exists as well. But the most common one is row major order, which you go through rows and then go through columns. So we're going to do a couple of examples here. I have my list of information at Skokie over a week, and we have some data of products that have been sold by McDonald's, Burger King, and Wendy's. They want us to print the number of salads sold by Burger King. So since I'm printing, I need to do system out print line, right? System dot out dot print line, and I need to access the number of salads sold by Burger King. So I need this number right there. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to label my rows and my columns. So my columns would be 0, 1, 2. My rows would be 0, 1, 2. So I need 2, 1 to access. My 2D array is called products. So I'm going to say products, bracket, I'm going to say row first, so 2, and then my column is 1. So that would print out the number of salads sold by Burger King for that week. Now they want me to change the number of fries sold by McDonald's to 9,001, because obviously the fries of McDonald's would be the best because they are superior. I'm going to have to access, so I'm going to do my labeling again since that got removed. So I need to change this number right here, right? So I need to access of products. I need to access row 1, column 0, and I need to change it to 9,001. They now want me to change the number of burgers sold by Burger King to be the same as the number of burgers sold by Wendy's. So again, I'm going to label my sides here, 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2. So they want us to change this value to be the same as that value. So what I'm going to let you do, pause the video quick, see if you can get that answer. See, can you figure it out? If you can figure it out, then unpause the video and check your answer and make sure it's right. Okay, I'm going to assume you paused. I'm assuming you tried it. So I'm going to access spot 0, 1, and I want to change it to be the spot products 0, 2 is what they told me. Not terrible, right? This one, I want to change the number of salads sold by Wendy's be the same as the number of fries sold by Wendy's. So again, I'm going to label my sides 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2. So they want me to change this value to be the same as that value. So I'm going to be copying 500 to put there. So that means I need to access products, bracket 2, bracket 2, and I'm going to make it equal to products, bracket 1, bracket 2. Just like that. Now they want me to find the total of all the items sold by all 3 restaurants. So here's what I could do. I could say product 00 plus product 01 plus product 02, but who's got time for that? So I'm going to make a double for loop. I don't have a lot of room here, but I'm going to make my total up here. So I'm going to go int total equals 0. And I'm going to make those double for loops. So for int c, or excuse me, marsh, row equals 0. I want my rows to be less than the number of rows, which is products dot length. Because remember, products dot length is the number of rows, r plus plus. And then I'm going to get a for loop for my column amount. So C needs to be less than products bracket 0 dot length. C plus plus. So now I have everybody. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here. I'm going to make myself a current variable, just like we've done with regular arrays. And that is going to be equal to products bracket R bracket C, because those 2 variables are going to be used. Kind of like when we used to do products bracket index, but now we have double the index to kind of worry about. Now that certain number, that individual number, I'm going to add to my total. And that would be my official program. Now this one, they want me to find the average rating by the reviewer in row 2. So they only want me to find the average of this row right here. So notice I'm not having to go through all of the rows. I'm only having to go through all of the columns. So I only need a for loop going through the columns. I am going to make a variable for my total though before I start my program or my for loop going through all my columns. And since I'm going through my columns, I'm going to make my index value be C. And I'm going to say C needs to be less than, and it looks like, I think this was, oh, they didn't tell me what this is called. I think it's called ratings, actually. And since this is going through the columns, I need to use bracket 0 dot length to get my stuff. And I'm going to say C++, just like that. And then what's cool is I'm going to get myself an individual current, right? One thing, one value. And I'm going to say ratings. Now you're probably thinking, well, Marsh, we don't have an R to put here. Well, we do actually. We have a number because we only want row 2, right? We're not changing that row. We are changing our column, which is going to be our index value. I'm going to add to my total that value. Just like that. And then outside of that loop, I'm going to make myself an average, which is going to be, total divided by, how do I find how many there are? That would be the number of columns, right? So I'm going to say ratings bracket 0 dot length. And you know what? I could even do ratings bracket 2 dot length because they're the same length, right? They both have the same number of columns, row 0 and row 2. That is the end of our video today. You're going to want to go onto Classroom. There should be a link to our example program on CodeHS. I will see you there. So, in our two-dimensional array example program, we're going to do the following. We're going to create a two-dimensional array with 2 rows and 3 columns. We're going to fill that two-dimensional array with many different numbers, even, odds, negatives, positives, 0, all the numbers. We're going to print all the values of the two-dimensional array in the correct format. We're going to find the total of all of them. We're going to find how many evens are in it, and we're going to find the total of all the negatives in there. There we go. So we're just going to play in main right here. So first thing, I'm going to make myself my two-dimensional array. I'm going to put int values in there. So I'm going to go int bracket, 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 bracket. Okay. No space needed there, but if you want to put a space in between the two brackets. I'm going to name mine numbers equals new int. And they said, oh, was it 3 rows, 4 columns? 2 rows, 3 columns. So I need 2 and a 3. Whoa. Marsh, where did you go? Bracket 2, bracket 3. Just like that. Okay. Now, I need to fill that guy with many, many different numbers. Now, since I'm doing just a 2 by 3, which is 6 spots, I'm just going to do all of them on their own. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go numbers bracket 0 bracket 0, and I'm going to give it a number of 2. And I'm just going to go through here and fill everybody full of numbers. -5. And number, Marsh, type the right thing in. Numbers bracket 2 bracket 0. Oh, hold up. 2 rows, Marsh. 0, 1. Nah, ha, ha. 0. Marsh can't think here, people. There we go. Let's put a +6 in there. Oop, and that's numbers. There you go. Numbers, bracket 0, bracket 2 is going to have the number -10. Numbers, I've done all of 0 row. Let's do row 1, which would be 8. And then I haven't done a 0. Numbers, 1 bracket 2 will be a 0, like that. Remember 0, 1, because there's 2 rows, 3 columns, which mean my indices of rows would be 0, 1, and my indices of columns would be 0 through 2. That's why I messed up almost there. I don't have a 2, 2, because it is a rectangle, not a square. I need to print out all of my values, so I'm going to do a quick little code here. Print out all the values. Now, unfortunately, and I know you would like it to be, but if I do system out print line and I say numbers, I am sorry to announce, but it is not a beautiful picture. It actually gives you gobbledygook. I know. Someone did not write us a 2-string when they made this in Java. So what we're going to do to print out all the numbers, you do have to use that double for loop structure. So I'm going to do for int my rows. Row, it needs to be less than the number of rows, which is numbers.length, right? And then I'm going to go r++. I'm going to go to a new line. I'm going to do the same for loop, but I'm going to go through my columns this time. And I'm going to do for my number of columns, bracket 0, numbers bracket 0, dot my length, and then C++. And then just like last time, like I've been always saying, let's make that current value so that we don't have to worry about having everything. Let's get one thing, and that one thing we're going to just print. And I'm going to also put a space behind it. And you know what? Now I just thought of it. It can't be a print line. Because if I do a print line, what is that going to even look like? That's going to be just a bunch of numbers in a line, right? Yeah, that's not what I wanted. I wanted it to look like a table. So I'm going to do a print. So that way it just prints all of the numbers, but then it prints them just in a one row. So somewhere I need to go and make it so it goes to a new row, which would mean I have to go through all of my columns, right? So between the ending of my rows and my ending of my between the ending of my columns and the ending of the rows, I have to do a print line. So now we actually get a pretty looking array that we can actually read, just like that. Now that we've printed out everything, we're going to find the total of all the values in our two-dimensional array. So I'm going to go to my bottom here. I'm going to make my zoom in here, make my little bit of a room. There we go. Put my comment, find the total of all the values in the array. So if I have to go through the entire array one at a time, that means I need that double for loop structure. So I'm going to type it again. Now I know you're thinking, Marsh, you could just copy it. I could, but here's the thing. The more times that I type this thing out, the more times my hands and my brain are going to remember it. So if I continually type it over and over and over and over and over and over, I'm not going to forget it. So that's why I'm going to type it over and over and over and over. So I'm going to do the same thing for my columns. And honestly, this is because this is such a common thing that you're going to write out that you'll get really used to typing it out. There we go. So I've just found my rows, just found my columns, and just like above, I'm going to get myself a single value of that two-dimensional array numbers. Well, if I need a total, I probably need to make myself a variable, right? So I'm going to go above my variables, or above my loop structure. I'm going to make my variable. And then inside here, I'm going to add the current number to my total. Just like that. And then outside of my for loop structure, I'm going to do a system out print line and print out my total. Just like that. So now if I run it, I get a total of 1. 8, which, does that make sense? 8 minus 10 is -2. -7 plus 8 is, in fact, 1. We did get the actual total. The next example thing they want us to do is count how many even numbers there are in this two-dimensional array. So I'm going to give myself a little bit of room again. There we go. Count how many even numbers in the array. Well, if I'm counting how many numbers, that means I have to go and look at each individual number, which means, you got it, double for loop. Something to keep in mind if you look at other people's code, a lot of times what you'll see for the rows in the column index variable, you'll see I and J. I don't use I and J because I find that it's harder for my brain to think about who's the row and who's the column. That's why you're going to consistently see me say R and C so that I don't have to remember who is the row and who is the column, because row and column start with R and C. However, a lot of times you'll see I and J, and the other problem I have with I and J is in the back of the room when I'm typing it. A lot of you are going to have struggling figuring out, is that an I or is that a J? So when I use R and C, it's a lot harder for you guys to mess that up. I'm going to do a current variable. So again, I'm going to get a single guy from there, just like that. And they needed me to identify if there is an even number. So if I'm saying if, so that means I need to write an if, right? And how could I check to see if the current number I'm looking at is even? Well, we know if a number is even, that means if I try to divide by 2, there should be no leftovers, right? So if I mod divide by 2, I should have no leftovers. And if that's the case, they told me that I should count that. So I do need a counter. So I'm going to go above my loop, make myself my counter, and add one to it inside my loop. And then outside that really beautiful looping structure, I am going to print out that counter. Just like that. I'll run my program again. There should be 1, 2, 3, 5. Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 0 is technically considered an even number on our program, but -5 is the only not even number. Forgot about negative 10. Example, we're going to find the total of all the negative numbers for our last example. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask you to pause the video, and I'm going to ask you to see, can you get this code? So I want you to find the total of all the negative numbers. Okay, so I'm assuming that you immediately went into creating that for loop structure, right? So you typed out your for loop structure like this, and you did the other for loop, because you are so used to typing this by now, right? You're like, oh my goodness, Marsh, I am sick and tired of typing that double for loop structure, but okay. Okay, and then you got yourself a current number, right? Because you have been using that with a regular array, so why not use that with a two-dimensional array? And then you had to see, was that number negative? So that means I need an if, right? So to check for a negative number, you must have checked for less than 0. And if that was the case, we said we wanted to add them. So I'm going to int total. And I'm going to add my total. I'm going to add the current to it. And then, of course, print line, our new total. Now I just thought of it. It can't be a total, could it? Because we already made a total. So I'm going to make total 1. There we go. Otherwise, it would get angry with me. So we should get an answer of negative 15? Yeah! I'll put my comment. Find the total of negative numbers. There we go. So a lot of times, maybe you're looking for everything that has a certain criteria. Maybe you are adding a total up. Maybe you're finding all the negatives. Maybe you're counting how many negatives. Maybe you are finding the even numbers. It all depends. But ultimately, every single thing that you're doing with these, most of the time you're doing that double for loop structure. So getting that nailed down, learning that code so that you can immediately type it in would be something super good and something I would recommend highly to know how to do. But with that, that is the end of this video. I will see you later. We're going to keep practicing our two-dimensional arrays, keep doing lots and lots of programs so we get used to it. But I will see you later, Sabers.